Hey guys, welcome to Sit Topical. Nate here, and today I'm going to be ranking Jedi that appear in films. So, to be clear, it's a movie channel, so I'm only basing this off of their movie appearances, not considering Clone Wars, Rebels, yada yada. All the extra stuff, which I still love, but today we're going just by the movies, which is going to make this interesting. So first off, we have Ki-Adi-Mundi, sits on the Jedi Council, makes lots of decisions, makes wartime decisions, contributes to what happens to Anakin, gets killed during Order 66. So ultimately, for his contributions to the downfall of the Jedi Order, I want to say he's ass. I don't like the way he looks either. Next up, we have Kit Fisto. One of the coolest looking Jedi. I have always been a big Kit Fisto fan ever since I first saw him in the movies. Along with Ki-Adi-Mundi, another Jedi, shows up to rescue them in Attack of the Clones. He can breathe underwater. That's pretty cool. I don't think he's as detrimental to the downfall of the Jedi, and I think that even in the films we get to see that he is in fact pretty badass. But we don't get to see him do too much, and he's not that integral. So for being basically just another Jedi in the movies, I got to give him an alright. Next up we got Plo Koon. I think he's a little better. Another really cool design. Love him a lot. Really love how much of him we get in like Clone Wars and stuff like that. But again, only basing this stuff off the movies. But not only do we get to see him fight sometimes, we get to see him fly, which is ultimately how he dies during Order 66. So again, basing this off the movies, which makes some of these really tough because it leaves me very limited to what I can actually talk about with them. I want to say all right, just because I like him so much. But movie only Plo Koon, gotta give him an all right. Next up we have Anakin, which this one's really interesting because it is what it is. And it's tough because at first glance, when I first watched these movies, I'm like, Anakin, he's kind of a snot. He's not doing what he's being told to do. It's like he's so arrogant, and obviously like a lot of that leads to the Vader stuff, but he, like, several years later and now ultimately removed from that and being able to examine the Jedi, specifically the Jedi we see in the films, and what is now really being explored even more in like all the Disney Plus shows, is that the Jedi were wrong about a lot of things, and they were really, really arrogant and very set in their ways, and so set in their ways that they couldn't see what was happening underneath. And Anakin was kind of like aware of all of that. So he definitely wasn't right about everything, but for a long time he ultimately had what would have been good for the Jedi Order in mind, but it was also all from a very like, what's good for me mindset. And then obviously he turns into Vader, and not in the movies, but would go on to kill a lot of Jedi before coming back. But it's like, when he comes back, it's like, it's not like you became a Jedi again. It's just like you decided to stop being an asshole. So I'm really torn for him, but I'm going to say pretty good because he still accomplished a lot for the Jedi Order. Probably the best like one-on-one combat guy they had eventually. I mean, he gets his ass handed to him at the end of Attack of the Clones, but by the beginning of episode 3 we see that he's quite formidable, so I'm gonna go with that. Next up we got Yoda. Another tough one. I mean, Yoda's sick. He trains Luke. Kind of like, I don't think the leader of the Jedi Council is like the right way to put it, because it is a council. They're all masters. But clearly the one that they look to for guidance, his wisdom, is often sought after even by other masters in the films. Also, really just smart and is the closest one to like kind of figuring out that maybe the way the Jedi are currently doing things isn't quite there. And then obviously we get what Yoda, his interactions with Luke and Rey in the sequel trilogy. I don't see any way around it. Yoda's definitely going to be the first in the goated category. I think he is quite earned it. And we get to see him fight a little bit, and he has a really unique and cool fighting style. So, yeah. Next up we have Shakti. Pretty completely irrelevant in the movies. Yeah, she's just pretty completely irrelevant in the movies. And so what she does, we do get to her to see of her is good. She's a general in the Clone Wars. She's, leading all this kind of stuff. But like maybe the most, I'm looking at probably the second most irrelevant person on this list. So even though I do know who she is, I don't think she's ass, but I think she belongs in the who category, because a lot of your casual Star Wars fans are going to be like, oh, that person looks like Ahsoka, or she looks familiar, but I couldn't tell you anything about her. So I think that's where she's got to go. Next up, we have Luke. Really, another really tricky one. I guess most of them are kind of this way. Our main character for the original trilogy, not a Jedi, doesn't really become a Jedi until episode 2, but doesn't really complete his training, but then just kind of decides to call himself a Jedi. And then obviously not really present until the next to last scene of episode 3. So the prequels don't matter for Luke, but then it gets really interesting in the sequel trilogy because obviously he's abandoned the Order. He's cut himself off from the Force. He is now finally like, the Jedi are idiots. Like, we had no idea what we were doing. But then he reconnects himself to the Force, and we get to see in what, in my opinion, is one of the coolest things we've ever seen in Star Wars, with his Force projection and his little mini fight with Kylo Ren, and all that stuff. Training Rey, that part's kind of hit or miss. But, I mean, ultimately, she doesn't really get much more training than he got from Yoda. So, as a Jedi, I think Luke's pretty good. I think that's really controversial. I think Luke is like kind of your go-to. And again, it's just the movies, so I can't count his scene in The Mandalorian or like other stuff that we get from him. So just from what we see in the movies, Luke doesn't even really spend that much time as a Jedi on screen. So I feel good about it. I think it's right. Next up, we have Luminara Unduli, which again, she's kind of just she's just like Shakti. A really cool character. I know a lot more about her, and I think she's super interesting. But, I mean, I can only go off what happens in the movies. And so, based on the movies, I got to put her in the who category. And it's not the movie's fault. You only get so much time to like advance your plot and spend time with certain characters and all that stuff. So, next up we have Mace Windu. Coolest lightsaber ever, no doubt. Great Jedi. Jedi Master, sits on the council. Not really afraid of anything. Does a lot of stuff in the Clone Wars. Confronts Palpatine. Beats him. A lot of discourse on the interwebs about whether or not it was intentional and Palpatine was just stalling until Anakin would show up and do something. But whether intentional or not, he basically beat Palpatine. The guy's super powerful. So on Jedi power scaling, he's way up there. But on being a good Jedi is where he kind of lacks a little bit, because on one hand, I'd say he was good for the Order because everyone is aware of and talks about how, he not necessarily straddled the line to the dark side, but he was much closer to it than any other Jedi was, and that gave him, extra abilities and extra insight. But he's like one of the most arrogant Jedi there is. Like, I mean, people like Mace Windu are the reason that the Jedi were so blind to what the dark side was doing during all of this. And so Mace Windu himself was actually really detrimental to what ultimately happened to the Jedi leading up to Order 66. So with all of that stuff combined, I'm going to say he's also pretty good. Next up, we have Qui-Gon Jinn. Okay fighter. He gets beat by Darth Maul in a one-on-one. But really smart. Not dissimilar to Yoda in his wiseness. Is always willing to look deeper. Doesn't ever necessarily accept things for what they immediately are. He has lots of the mental part of being a Jedi down. The calmness, the understanding, using the Jedi powers when it's necessary. Goes against the Council's wishes, so he's again, kind of putting himself in that category of seeing that things aren't necessarily all good in the Jedi Order. But we just don't get him for that long. We really get him for one movie, and then kind of in little tiny bits and pieces throughout the rest. So I think that if I had a little bit more of Qui-Gon, or at least if I could consider the book Master and Apprentice or other stuff that we've seen from Qui-Gon from the shows and things like that, Qui-Gon would be goated. But for what I have to consider for the movies, I got to put him in the pretty good category as well. Next up, we have Obi-Wan. Probably the one that we get to spend maybe the most time with. I mean, we get him for 4 movies. Yeah, we get him for episode 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in a good chunk for all those movies except 4, obviously. Trained Anakin, was his best friend, tried to be submissive to the authority of the Jedi Council, slowly starts to realize that everything isn't what it's supposed to be. But at the same time, it's Obi-Wan wasn't stupid. I think there's plenty of stuff in the movies that hints that, he knew what was going on with Anakin and Padme, and he essentially let it happen. Tries to bring him back, doesn't want to fight him. He's smart, he has the wisdom, he has the combat ability. His understanding of how things need to play out in episode 4 for Luke and how that goes with him. Again, I think this one's pretty easy for me. I think Qui-Gon's going to be up there with Yoda in the goat, or not Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan is going to be up there in the goated category with Yoda. And then next up finally we have Rey. Definitely the most controversial. Lots of opinions about Rey out there. I don't agree with a lot of them. I like Rey. I think Rey's really cool. In the grand scheme of things, she doesn't really get much more training than Luke had, at least in the movies. So I don't really like the whole argument about she just is good all of a sudden, blah, blah, blah. Spent her whole life as a scavenger, has been self-trained in staff work. Obviously, wielding a staff is way different than wielding an actual sword. But it doesn't really bother me that she just picks up a lightsaber that first time and can somewhat handle herself against an injured Kylo Ren. You feel how you want to feel about it. If you don't feel the way I don't feel about it, just remember, I don't give a fuck. So looking at everything that she does, which is some pretty incredible stuff, ultimately sort of bringing a semblance of balance back to the Force between her and Kylo. But still I know we're supposed to get a Rey movie now, and I think that might change my opinion a little bit, and it will probably push her up or push her down. But for now, I think I got to put Rey in the pretty good category. I think that she has the potential to hit goated status. I think this next movie has the potential to push her down a line. I'm very open-minded to all of it. I don't know. But let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Scroll back up, hit the like button, and subscribe.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.